Come on then. Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. These are aeoniums, and they spent the winter in the wooden greenhouse because they're not hardy. Frost will kill them, but they do like to be outside once the weather warms up. And now we've reached the middle of May. The display I had here on the table needs refreshing, so I'm going to bring out all the succulents and put them on the table. And as far as aeoniums go, you can see they're looking a bit raggedy. There are dead leaves that can be taken off, like that. Now, where you have a flowering stem, like this will die back and needs cutting off. The rest of the plant will be perfectly okay. And if you've got any house plants that will survive temperatures down to 5 degrees, then they will be much happier outside in the fresh air with some sunshine, even with a bit of rain, than they will be cooped up indoors as they have been all winter. So if you've got a yard, if you've got a garden, think about bringing them out, then they can freshen up in the light and stay out all summer long. Now, coming up on today's programme, Francis visits Newby Hall in North Yorkshire to see a ravishing display of candelabra primulas.
I really love getting to understand and know how a plant grows in the wild. And these primulas will grow all along the water's edge, and they seed themselves really easily in those spaces.
We meet a mother and daughter floristry team as they prepare to create their debut at the RHS Chelsea Flower Show.
It's a chance for us to really showcase what we do and the flowers that we grow, and to put locally grown flowers, field-grown flowers on the stage.
Adam goes to a garden in Leicestershire, filled year-round with plants grown from bulbs, corms and tubers.
This garden provides a smile around every single corner. So this is your kitchen garden, and even in here, you have bulbous-driven plants that pop up and provide.
And I will be starting to plant out my cut flower beds. Just taken this flower off too, and looking closely at these aeoniums, there's whitefly, and if you touch them, they're a little bit sticky. And even if you can't or don't want to leave your houseplants outside, bring them out and maybe with a cloth just wipe them over, and then you can bring them back indoors. But looking at this, I think I'd like to put this out into the garden, but before I do so, I'm going to take a cutting. Now, when you take cuttings from any succulent, you do it rather differently than you do most plants. So if I take a stem like this one here, it's a nice straight shoot, cut that there like that. You can see that the stem here is green. And unlike most plants, they won't die because they've stored all their water in the stem. So take the cutting, let the stem callus over, they will stop losing liquid, and that will give them more time to form roots. So I'll leave that, and then in a couple of weeks' time, I'll put that into pure perlite. Even pure sand or grit would work well. And certainly by midsummer, I'll have a nice new plant, and this will grow away well. But having taken that cutting, I think I'm going to take this to the jewel garden and put it in the border. I've got a spot here near the edge of the path. It'll get plenty of sun, and the main thing to worry about if you're planting aeoniums out into the garden is they don't get too wet. And if it is going to be a problem, then put grit at the bottom of the hole, and that will mean the roots aren't sitting in wet. The other thing which I have to be mindful of here in the jewel garden is they don't get swamped by neighbouring plants. Everything grows here so strongly and so lushly, it can literally have its light blocked, and with the aeoniums, that would be bad news. So I have to put it near the edge here. So let's make a hole. I think that will be about right. Right. Now, this has been in this pot for quite a long time, so I suspect it's a bit root bound. And aeoniums are very brittle. So let's see how it comes out. Oh yeah, not too bad, not too bad. Come on, out you come. There we go. Look how dry that is. I'll take the crocks out the bottom. You see, if you are potting it up, and this is a good example, add lots of grit. They really like drainage. So we're going to pop that like that there. And you can see it's slightly proud, just so there's no risk of getting waterlogged. And finally, you don't need to water it in. Even if we have a total drought, it won't be too dry for the aeonium. Actually, the biggest problem will be Ned's tail, because they're fairly brittle, and a swipe from his tail could cut the whole thing down to the ground, but let's hope not. And I've got myself another pot which needs a good clean, and I can use it for something else. But we're off now to join Francis, who went up to North Yorkshire, to Newby Hall near Ripon.
The first thing that strikes you about Newby Hall is its really clever design. Lots of little gardens all come off this big central herbaceous border, just like rooms off a corridor, and each with their own planting style and their own planting season. So when you come here, no matter what time of year, there's always something to look at.
The main border runs all the way to the River Ure, and running water is key to the plants I'm here to see today in all their glory.
This is the water garden, a huge pond fed by a gently running stream and filled with stunning wetland species. So there's Iris pseudochorus, very majestic Gunnera manicata and Regersia, amongst others. But undoubtedly, the star of the show here has to be the candelabra primulas. They're absolutely stunning. I really love getting to understand and know how a plant grows in the wild. And these primulas will grow all along the water's edge, and they seed themselves really easily in those spaces, just like along this stream here. Those seeds land in the water, float along, and when they find a really lovely place to rest, they'll begin to put down their roots and start growing.
Candelabra primulas are beautiful sculptural plants originating from China and the Himalayas, where they grow in wet mountain meadows, along stream sides, on muddy slopes and in moist open pastures. And this gives us a clue as to where we can grow them in our own gardens.
Any plants that grow in or beside water have a lot of challenging conditions to deal with. The first is they have to cling on and not get washed away, so primulas have very strong roots. The second is that they have to get air to the roots as well as to the top of the plant. So as with many wetland plants, primulas have spongy roots also, so they have air right underneath the soil for gas exchange and all the other essential things the plant has to do.
In simple terms, the plants are breathing and using their spongy roots to hold and exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide.
Now, primulas hybridise very easily, so you can see this huge array of different colours here. This is because they can cross-pollinate. And although they grow by the water, they are actually a little bit more tolerant than you might think. So, if you look here, you can see they have seeded themselves right in the edge of the pathways and between the paving slabs. So if you grew them in your own garden, you can be a little bit more flexible, although of course they will definitely prefer to have their roots damp for most of the time. here among the grasses, shrubs and trees is Primula japonica postford white with its majestic stems of beautiful white flowers.
Candelabra primulas get their name from the whorls of flowers produced in tiers all the way up the stem.
These whorls contain about 10 or so flowers and will form every 5 or 6 days a new tier. So you can see that some of these have already been flowering for a number of weeks and there are still new flowers forming on the top. That gives them a really long flowering period, which of course is great in the garden, but there is a reason for it. The longer a plant flowers, the more chance it has of being pollinated, because in bad weather, pollinators won't come out. So this flowering for weeks and weeks means there's a really good chance that they will. And you can see the flower form itself really sucks you in when you look closely at it. You can see the throat of the flower, where that nectar is situated, and pollinators can access it. It's always really worth getting such a good look up and close at the flowers, just to really understand them. And the reason that these flowers are so tall, again, it's very beautiful, but it's so that insects can see them in other wetland plants and find those flowers. As you go down the stem, you see that these have very, very big leaves. And there are a couple of reasons for that. So in a shady riverside, that will maximise the chance of being able to capture bits of sunlight. But big leaves in a wetland meadow, which these can also happily grow in, will shade out the other plants around the primulas and give the primulas more chance of growing and less competition close to its roots.
Lawrence Wright is the head gardener here, and he is currently renovating the rock garden.
So this is obviously a work in progress, but tell me about this amazing transformation that's happening.
We've spent the last sort of 4 or 5 years actually working through the rock garden project.
Right.
It's a fascinating story. Actually, the rock garden was designed in 1912, was built up until 1914.
Yeah.
And over on the far side, there's a cascade water feature which was turned on in August 1914. And then the entire garden team went off to war, and there's basically been 100 years of neglect.
Nothing since?
Nothing really since. The tiny little bit of trimming and pulling off the worst weeds, but other than that, not a huge amount.
Wow.
So then in 2019, the team embarked on a restoration and redevelopment project. And then a few years later, we're sort of midpoint.
It's beautiful. So talk me through this. I can see obviously there are the primulas, which you wouldn't typically expect to see in a rock garden necessarily.
What we've done is where we've got the sunny, more open areas, we're then using that as a space to showcase alpine plants. And then in the shady areas, we've gone for a more woodland planting style. So it's given us huge variance of interest in the planting. And then specifically here where the primulas are, it's naturally a damper area of the rock garden.
Okay.
And originally we actually set out with the view of growing the Meconopsis, the blue poppies.
Which are looking stunning.
Looking stunning right now.
And it naturally stays wet enough here for them to happily survive.
It's naturally wet, but we've done a little bit of landscaping to try and encourage the moisture to stay. So we've actually created a very slight valley, and it runs around the area that the Meconopsis and the primulas are in. Essentially, rain that falls on the top of either side of the valley runs down to the middle, and then we try and keep as much moisture in the soil as possible. At the bottom of that, we've incorporated loads of well-rotted manure, which is great for the Meconopsis specifically because they enjoy really deep, rich, fertile soil,
yeah.
But it holds moisture as well.
Okay.
So everything that's great for the Meconopsis is then fantastic for the primula too.
You must be really chuffed with how this is all taking shape.
Really chuffed.
When we think of plants that thrive in wet, boggy ground, we tend to think of huge jungle-like foliage and lots of greenery. And that's why primulas are so valuable, because they thrive in just those conditions, but they bring colour and they bring vibrancy and they bring joy and they bring flowers.
I love candelabra primulas and grow them down in the damp garden, but I confess I've never seen them growing like that in a meadow, and I thought they looked staggering. Right, out of the way, Ned. I'm coming in. These are 4 new cut flower beds. The fact that they're raised beds means that we can create good drainage. And we've done that by putting rubble in the bottom of each one, and then soil, and then we've added quite a lot of grit. And you can see that it's very loose, friable soil. And that is great for developing a good root system, because when you're growing cut flowers, it doesn't matter so much if the plant itself is not as big as you necessarily might want it if it's in a border. It's the flowers above all that we want. Well, I've got 3 different annuals here. This is a tray of cornflowers. It's called double black, lovely, rich, burgundy colour. So I'm just going to plant them out in a row. Just enough width so they can be nice, strong plants. And the only thing that you do need to make sure when you're growing cut flowers, particularly in a raised bed like this, which drains, is that you're fairly near a water supply, because they will need watering, particularly if it gets hot and dry. Right. I have sown lots of cosmos, but none of them are ready for planting out, and they won't be for about 2 or 3 more weeks. So I've bought a few. Now, when you're growing cosmos, what you're looking for is nice bushy plants. They do have a tendency to get leggy. So if they're leggy, just pinch out the tops, and then they'll get bushy, and then you'll have lots of side shoots and therefore lots of flowers. And the other thing about them, which really matters, is that they need to be regularly picked or deadheaded, and then they will go on producing flowers into autumn. But if you leave them, then they go to seed, and that's not what you want at all. Now, back to my own seedlings. This is Ami majus, and they make a brilliant cut flower. They're quite tall. They're one of my favourite plants, in fact. It's quite late in the year to sow Ami majus, but you could try sowing Ami visnaga. That responds better to a later sowing. So much for annuals, but of course, anything that's going to provide you material that you want for decoration indoors counts as cut flowers. That could be stems, it certainly could be foliage, and it can be flowers from any type of plant. And in fact, I've got some dahlias here. This is a variety called Totally Tangerine. And in fact, my plan is to fill this particular bed entirely with dahlias. 2 more of the Totally Tangerine, which will go at the end. So that will go there, and that there. And later on, I've got herbaceous perennials to put in, as well as lots more annuals that are coming from seed. But let's get these in the ground. I'm not sure this will be man enough to dig a hole, but we'll try. Because these aren't going to live in here, I will lift them in the winter. They don't need to be planted too deep. Just in the last month, they've grown really good roots. So I can put that in like that, and that will be perfectly happy. Now, if you really want to see cut flowers at their very best, the place to go, like almost everything else in the horticultural world, is Chelsea. And Chelsea is coming up soon. So we went to Scotland to visit a mother and daughter team preparing their cut flowers for the show.
I've spent a long time working with flowers. I never get tired of seeing how happy people are when they're given flowers. If our flowers can bring some sort of a memory, joy to that person, I never get tired of that.
I grew up in a flower shop and flowers have always been incredibly important to me. Flowers themselves and flower arranging as an act is a really beautiful way to go into a deep thinking space, and that space of meditation and calmness is quite rare to find.
I'm Lucina Curry.
And I'm Lauren Printy Curry, and this is my mum.
And we're going to Chelsea. We love working together. I actually don't even think about it. You know, we just come in, we work, we go out, we sing, we're quiet, we listen to the birds and we're in the polytunnel. We just work away.
We have a lot of fun.
We were doing a workshop and a friend at the workshop, you know, said, have you ever thought of doing Chelsea? So that just planted the seed, and then from there we just thought we'll apply, we'll do the drawings, we'll get our heads together, the collaboration of what we're going to do, and we did, and we waited, and it came back and they said yes. Well, my path into floristry was through my mum and dad. My mum and dad had a grocery shop, and my dad wanted to introduce some flowers to it, and I went to college. My dad taught me to go into the market and, you know, how to buy, and I've got to thank my mum and dad for it.
I did take a different path because I've always been a very creative person. I wanted to be an artist. I went to art school and I studied sculpture, and I worked as an exhibiting artist for around 10 years. I got married in 2018 and my mum and I decided to do the flowers ourselves. And we were looking for garden-grown flowers and realised they were quite hard to come by, and they certainly couldn't be purchased at the wholesale flower market. So we sourced flowers from my aunt's garden, my grand's garden, my own garden, my parents' garden, and it was a real revelationary moment just to how powerful these things are and how much more meaningful than anything else you could ever buy that was manufactured. That was when Days of Dahlia was born. We're going to be exhibiting in the floristry category as part of the creative spaces, and this is a more experimental category. It doesn't have any medals associated with it, and it's a chance for us to really showcase what we do and the flowers that we grow, and to put locally grown flowers, field-grown flowers on the stage. So here I've got Japanese maple, which is just starting to unfurl. I've got really gorgeous scented narcissi and tulips. I've also got cherry blossom nestled in here, which also has that sort of rust colour, which is speaking to the Japanese maple. I've got bluebells and perennial cornflower and some dancing ranunculus as well. All a celebration of this moment in the garden.
We have been here 24 years. It's always been our home, so it feels really, really even more personal because it is our home and the connection that we have to the land.
Our ethos is to grow all of our own flowers, and every single flower which will be displayed in our exhibition at the Chelsea Flower Show will be grown here. So this is Sweet Rocket, which is quite a typical cottage garden flower. You can see it growing wild around here as well. It has really tall stems with clusters of white or lilac, very highly scented flowers on the top. We're hoping that the Sweet Rocket will be flowering in the next couple of weeks. Probably not these ones, but certainly these ones will be. We'll certainly be cutting from these plants for Chelsea. So yeah, we definitely do look to things that are not commonly seen in floristry and are more commonly seen in gardens.
The conditions here where we are is very bleak. We're very exposed to wind, rain. We're very high up above sea level. Very dreich days that we have here. So yeah, we get hit with a lot, and it, you know, but we work with it.
When I'm cutting flowers, I am looking for anything unusual in terms of bend of stem or colour variation in the petals, variation in the size of the flower head itself. Flowers are indifferent to us. They're beautiful anyway, and I'm really at the mercy of them and their season and when they're ready. How we display things is really, really important. We have a zero waste approach to floristry, and instead of thinking about that as something that can hold you back, we want to display that as something which can actually do the opposite and can open up entirely new possibilities. So our design is going to be a metal, very simple metal armature, and it's going to be draped with botanically dyed silk. There's going to be a network of glass vials behind the silk, which are going to be filled with water and suspended from the metal armature. And the flowers are going to be inserted through holes through the silk and are going to be hydrated from behind, and it's going to look as if they're just growing from the fabric itself.
Cutting the flowers for Chelsea, we're leaving on the Friday, so we'll probably be cutting from Wednesday to get them conditioned in the water. Good drink before they go. They'll be drinking while they're going down to Chelsea. I trust the flowers, yes. They're going to be all singing, all dancing on the way down, and they're going to be all singing and dancing at Chelsea. Yeah, I trust the flowers.
Well, I can't wait to see them at Chelsea, which is only next week. It's come round again so soon. Now, the blossom here in the orchard is just wonderful, better than it has been for years and years. And most of that is down to the weather, which of course you can't control. But really importantly, it's all flowering at the same time. And that means it's filled with bees and other pollinators, which means, with our fingers crossed, we should have a really good crop of apples this year. Now, still to come on today's programme. Adam visits a garden with year-round interest, from plants grown from bulbs, corms and tubers.
The diversity is a bit mind-blowing. I think at times we undervalue them. You can probably find one that's going to provide you with something nearly every month of the year.
And we meet a gardener who gave up city life to create a stunning garden in rural Yorkshire.
There was no garden that you could call a garden. I thought, wow, we've got quite a project ahead of us.
We're now going to visit one of your gardens. And it belongs to Maria Billington, who's come up with a novel way of propagating vegetables.
Hello, I'm Maria from Scarborough. And because I live near the sea, I don't have a lot of space, so I tend to grow most of my things in containers. However, recently I've discovered a way of growing vegetables and salads from scraps. It happened quite by accident, really. A while ago I decided I'd try and attempt to make my own plant food, so I got all sorts of kitchen scraps, put them in a bucket of water, and then promptly forgot about them. A few weeks later, to my amazement, I've discovered that many of them actually grow into new plants, complete new vegetables and salads. So I decided I'd like to share this with you. Now, what I do at the beginning is, for instance, with the lettuce, is cut it off maybe 3 centimetres, like that. Take off any old leaves from the outside, and then pop it into some water on a windowsill, which is not direct sunlight, but quite bright light. And then at the bottom, after a few weeks, you will get roots. Now, this is one that's had maybe about a couple of weeks and see how it's already growing into a new lettuce. And as soon as it starts at the bottom to get roots, it will get put into a pot. Another really easy one to do is cabbage. Now, again, cut the bottom off. One of my favourites is this wonderful, wonderful celery. And you can see how it's grown incredible new celery stalks. And it's just beautiful as well as being tasty to eat. I just chop bits off when I want. But it's beautiful, and I know it's cost absolutely nothing because it's come from scraps. It's all great fun. So why not try it? Because it's absolutely free, doesn't cost you a penny, and it looks beautiful, it's great, and it's really, really good fun. So thanks for watching, and do have a go.
Thank you for that, Maria. It's a good tip and not one that I'd ever thought of doing, but brilliant if you're growing vegetables in pots, which is a great idea in a limited space. And of course, as you say, absolutely free. I'm going to grow my peas now from seed outside in the garden, and normally I would have at least one crop in the ground by now, but it's been too wet. So now the soil is warmed up, I can sow some peas, and I will be harvesting later than normal, but it should be absolutely fine. Now, throughout the centuries, there's been a lot of debate about the best way to grow peas. And I just stick to the method that I've used all my life, which is to draw a wide, very shallow drill. And all legumes do well with plenty of goodness in the soil, so it's a good idea to add some compost. But the debate has always been, is it better to sow a single row of peas, a double row of peas, or a triple row of peas? Well, I go for a double or a triple row. Now, this is a variety called Hurst green shaft, and they're really tasty. It's that incredible freshness you get from your own peas. This is where, of course, I need to have mindfulness and just concentrate on the simplicity and purity of the task in hand. If you're doing more than one row, just remember you do need space to walk between them to pick. So at least 2 feet, and if you've got the room, about 1 metre is perfect. When you've sown your peas, cover them over. And you can stake them now, but actually it's often easier to do it when the shoots appear. And then you can see exactly where the rows are. And if you make a sowing now, and then maybe another sowing in 3 weeks' time, it's about as late as it can go, that will give you a harvest through summer. At this time of year, I'm always sort of semi-bewitched by the intensity of the blossom and this incredible sense of life just surging out of the ground. And we rather tend to forget that actually an awful lot of plants have this extraordinary system of storing feed for the next year's flowers and display. And Adam went to a garden in Leicestershire, which has a wide selection of exactly those kind of plants.
Some of the easiest and most rewarding plants you can grow are those with their very own storage system. Bulbs, corms or tubers, which hold all the plant's energy their entire life. And they're plants that come back year after year. What's not to love? And today I'm visiting a garden where bulbous plants pack a punch all year round. So this is Oak Cottage. Now I'm going to take you back to the 1950s. A plantsman called Maurice Folks takes on this place. He's got a half-acre garden with not a lot in it. He spends years adding choice and unusual plants. But after Maurice died, his wife Iris sold the cottage. So when Colin and Jenny Carr bought it 8 years ago, they didn't just acquire a new house, but a horticultural legacy. Which means he took on a very fascinating garden.
The first 2 years we literally spent waiting to see what was underground.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. Maurice and Iris were quite a big deal in the village, weren't they? When it came to plant knowledge, they knew their stuff.
They knew their stuff. They knew exactly what to do with everything.
Yeah.
She was great when we came here. She gave us a list of all the trees in the garden and little labels from her plants, which was really useful.
Looking at the tree coverage, I'm thinking this is really a spring garden.
Yeah, very much a spring garden. So this area here, under this magnolia, is a carpet of fritillarias. Honestly, it's packed.
The snake's head fritillary, with its unique checkerboard pattern, will grow in sun or part shade, as long as the soil is fertile and never dries out. But it seems this garden was handed on with its very own set of instructions for tending bulbs.
One of the things that Iris did say to us, never use a trowel or use a spade. She always said...
Just use a fork.
Yeah, because
Yes.
it's when you use a fork, you do spear the odd one, but you don't spear so many as you know.
Exactly, you're not cutting a load of them in half. The garden is also planted with masses of bluebells and trilliums. Spring bulbs are often quite muted, so for a blast of colour, nothing beats a good show of tulips. Their performance tends to dwindle after the first year, if you keep them in the ground. Flowering is an exhausting process, and the bulbs need time to recover and build up their strength again. As with most spring bulbs, it's worth removing the spent blooms and waiting for the foliage to die back naturally before removing it. A lot of people now plant them as annuals, lift them out the ground. How do you do it?
Tend to leave them in as much as possible, but obviously if you're going to put a big plant in, they might be in the way when you start digging, so you have to move them.
So where are we going next?
Go this way.
Lovely. Just as the spring flowering plants begin to fade, a succession of vibrant plants are waiting in the wings. Crocosmia starts life each year as a bulb-like organ called a corm.
We've got the summer crocosmia.
Crocosmia, which is, I think, is a totally unvalued plant. But actually, lovely corms, you can pull them apart, spread them around all over the place.
We've got Lucifer, which is the red one, at the bottom of the garden, and that is really, really tall. This garden provides a smile around every single corner. So this is your kitchen garden, and even in here, you have bulbous-driven plants that pop up and provide. I mean, dahlias are incredible, aren't they? They're slowly coming. Some of them are better than others.
Do you want to say that again? Slowly, eh? They're nearly the same height as me, so I wouldn't say that was slowly. Dahlias store their food in underground tubers, which can be lifted and taken indoors over winter, or left out, depending on your conditions. Do you leave these in the ground, or do you take them out, or
These are left in the ground. They have been for the last 2 years.
It drains really well up here, so I don't think we have to worry too much about them getting too damp.
Yeah, exactly. And do you mulch them at all?
Yeah, Colin puts manure on them every year.
That's a very important role, Colin.
Thank you.
Shoveling the muck, mate.
They need it though, don't they?
They do need it, they certainly do.
I do cut them for the house and I'll give them away. And obviously the more you cut them, the more they come.
So what else have we got that stores its energy under the ground?
We've got the astromerias here.
Oh, which are a real pop of colour, aren't they, this time of year?
Beautiful. And make fantastic cut flowers.
So these will flower for you, what, going right into September?
Hopefully, yeah. They'll obviously, this lot will go. Yeah. And then if you leave it for a few weeks, you'll find that they start coming back again, so that you do get another pick in later in the season.
As the garden drifts through the summer months and creeps closer to winter, it's the hardy cyclamen hidden in every border that add a welcome splash of colour. Then the whole cycle starts again as the snake's head fritillaries make their return with the arrival of spring. You can see Jenny and Colin really love this garden and gently making it their own. You think about the bulbous group of plants, the diversity is a bit mind-blowing. I think at times we undervalue them, maybe just a little bit. Think about it. You can probably find one that's going to provide you with something nearly every month of the year.
I felt a bit guilty when the instruction came to use a fork and not a spade, because I love using a spade. I use this spade for practically everything. And sure enough, I've chopped quite a lot of bulbs in half in my time, but I've also speared quite a few with a fork. But the truth is, whatever you use, you don't want to damage bulbs if you possibly can help it, especially when they look as good as they do in Oak Cottage. But I bought the spade on this occasion because I've got a specific job to do. There are a couple of really large grasses. There's one here and one on the same position on the other side. It's a miscanthus, and at the moment, they're innocuous. They're about a foot tall, they're growing, and they seem fine. They're fitting in with this new surge of growth here in the grass borders. But quite quickly they will get big, and by midsummer, very big indeed. In fact, they can grow to about 15 foot tall. So I'm going to dig them up and move them to the back of the border, where they'll be fine, and they will set off the other grasses in front. And the point is now is a really good time to start the process of dividing, moving, or planting grasses, when the soil is warmed up and you can see new growth. But before I move those, I've got a much nicer job of planting some grasses. Now, I've got a few in the barrow here, and I've got a space in the front. And I've chosen this grass. Now, you may say, well, this is not the same. These are two different grasses. But actually, these are both panicum heavy metal. And this is an upright grass that has lovely sort of pinky flowers. Good for the front of a border because you can see through it and round it, and it's not going to dominate too much. But at the same time, it's going to add different layers and textures of interest. Now, you might say, well, obviously, that is a better plant than that. But actually, that's not necessarily the case. All it is this one has only just started to grow, and that's why you delay planting or moving grasses till now. You need to see active growth. Anyway, I'm going to put a pair here, and I've got another pair which I'm going to put further along the border. And planting grasses is a simple enough business. So that's coming out quite easily. Right, I'll pop that in there. And that does look fairly insignificant, and you think, well, is that going to do the job? But you have to trust the grass. Trust that it will grow to its full size and height, and it should control this space here. Now, if I do the same on the other side, I can't put off digging these out, and I have been putting it off because I've moved them before, and I know that they can be a bit of a beast because not only do they have really substantial growth above ground, they have very substantial roots too, which is not surprising. And they're rather woody and hard. So when you try and... I can't even get the spade in. Try here. Okay, it's a starting point. But the truth is, this is going to take quite a lot of graft and quite a lot of time to get them out successfully. So let's go and visit another garden. The owner, Sasha York, moved to the country, bought a house, but didn't buy a garden, just bought space. And if you're a gardener, space must be filled.
In late spring, I absolutely love walking through the garden because that's when the garden really starts to come alive. And I think, wow, we've got a new year ahead of us. If you can plant any prunus, plant a prunus cansan. It literally has droplets of the most beautiful blossom flowers. I'm Sasha York, and I've always loved gardening. It is a total therapy for me. I grew up in Northumberland, and my parents were really keen gardeners. So I think the passion was just always there. And then when I moved to London, I started working in the city, and I would get to work at 7 a.m. and I would get home at 7 p.m. And so for a lot of the time, went to work in the dark and you came home in the dark. That's when I started to really miss gardens. And then we moved to Yorkshire in 2007 to a house that hadn't been lived in for a few years. There was no garden that you could call a garden. And I thought, wow, we've got quite a project ahead of us. The house, it's quite an orange brick, and without anything on it, it's quite stark. I wanted the front of the house to be softened and to cover it in flowers and smell to come in through the windows. Right now, you're seeing it at the most perfect time. Look at the length of the racemes. They're absolutely beautiful, and it's only just starting to come out. And through it, we're growing up full staff rose, which is really lovely because you get the difference in the colour between the white wisteria and then the deep magenta of the rose. And actually, I do cut back wisteria 3 times. I cut it in September, November, and February. And that's what gives you the multitude of flowers. It's quite a daunting thing to create a garden from scratch. You're looking at an enormous expense. And I didn't want that to be the case. So we very much bought tiny little sort of £1 plants. All the yew in the garden were only sort of 30 centimetres. I think they cost £2 each. Yew, everybody thinks grows very, very slowly. I don't. As long as they're in the right place for their needs, they will grow quickly. This is a standard wisteria, and it's looking truly sensational, and the scent is just amazing. It is literally just dripping in flowers, and again, I prune this really tightly every year. So what I did was I found a very tall, thin, young wisteria, and then I created a framework over the top. And then once it had started to grow and established, I took that framework away, but I have had to put in a bit of steel here just to hold it. It's so heavy that I don't want it to topple over. And she's called Willa. I always have flowers in the house. I think it's really important. You don't need a lot of flowers to make something really beautiful in your house. But what I've got here is I've got an S-shaped S-tube vase, which I use quite a lot because you don't need very many flowers. So I'm just going to pop a few of each variety in each one. If you're doing any vases, just remove the lower leaves. A little bit of geranium. A treat, an allium. And you can see very quickly, just with a very few flowers, you've just got a lovely display of what's in the garden at the moment, and you can refresh it all through the year. Really simple, really seasonal, and really beautiful. I really do think it's very, very therapeutic. And for me, over the years when I've needed it, it's really offered me a place of peace and sanctuary and reflection. One of our children has been very unwell, and we spent a lot of time in hospital. And the first thing I do when I left hospital was come into the garden. It gives me hope. It gives me huge hope, because flowers and plants and wildlife are so key. And through the seasons of gardening, you know, a garden will always die, but it will always wake up. And that's what a garden does for me. It's the hope.
I do so agree with Sasha that in every situation, good and bad, gardens are always filled with hope. These are tree ferns, and they've been wrapped up since October. It's a good idea to keep them frost-free if you can, and the important thing is to protect the centre of the plant. And you can see we've got new fronds growing, which is fantastic. Now, cut back the old fronds, then you can see the new growth better. The secret of keeping tree ferns happy is to keep everything mild, not too cold, not too hot, and certainly not too dry. But what they do need is wet air. Now, if you can provide that, that also provides the perfect conditions for another plant that I'm going to try again, having given up a few years ago. This is Meconopsis, and they're one of those plants that has an aura about them, a mystique. That's for two reasons, really. The first, the most glorious one, is their colour. They are the most perfect blue of any plant that you could possibly grow. And the second reason is they are very particular about what they like. Now, if they like their conditions, they grow quite happily. But if they don't like it, they won't grow. They need really rich soil, they need drainage, but they mustn't dry out. And because the tree ferns don't like drying out, if I plant them amongst the tree ferns, I think they're going to be happy. My soil is really rich, they'll love that. We've got light shade here, they'll like that. And if they give me the blue flowers, then they're worth the trouble of spraying them and misting them. So I'm going to place them down sort of here amongst the tree ferns, making sure they don't get shaded out by other ferns. And obviously, once we get the blue flowers, you will be the first that I show. Right, let's get those in the ground. It's worth stressing when it comes to the soil, they don't like alkaline conditions. So that means if you've got chalk or limestone, they're never going to be happy and probably not worth trying. If you've got sandy soil, even if it's ericaceous, you need to beef it up. Add lots of compost or manure, and that will be water retentive and also have lots of food. And then every year, they will need generous mulching. There we go. Okay, I'll put the others in. And while I'm doing that, here are jobs for you to do this weekend. Most tulips will have finished flowering by now. And in order to ensure a display next year, snap off the seed heads, which you'll find will happen very easily. And this will mean that all the energy from the stem and the leaves will be put into making new bulbs for next year. Homemade comfrey tea is a really effective high potash feed and of course free. Cut the plants down to the ground. Using the stems and leaves and flowers, chop them up and pack them into a container. And then top this up with water until it's full. Set it to one side for at least 3 weeks, and it will smell bad, I warn you. And then you can strain it off so that you have a comfrey tea concentrate to use as a feed. Early sown broad beans will now need supporting. Using canes and string, create a few tiers of support just so they don't topple over under their own weight. And then when the beans are finished in a month or so's time, the whole thing can easily be dismantled. Well, that's it for today. And next week, we're at Chelsea. Our first Chelsea programme will be coming on Sunday evening with Sophie Rayworth and Joe Swift. And I will be there with the rest of the team from Monday all week. And then I'll see you back here at Longmeadow in 2 weeks' time. So until then, bye-bye. Come on.